Hey, good day, everybody. Welcome back to our Zoom Daily with Rabbi Shlomo Schwartz to a realistic map of meaning. We did take a few days off this week, but we're glad to be back tonight, and we will be back on Sunday as well. And we're talking about doing an earlier show on Tuesday and Wednesday, so we keep it a daily thing. So I'll just turn it over to Rabbi Schwartz. Let's jump right in and Shalom, Rabbi Schwartz. I see you already got your share screen up. We're going to turn the class over to you and let you take it away.
Thank you very much, and glad to be back. I had to work extra diligently to make this class happen. As I'm coming to you, you'll see a different background. I'm at a hall, at a college that has an event here celebrating Israel's 75th birthday. So asked me to make a blessing for the state of Israel, which I did, and it was very nice. And now we continue with our class, and Dan mentioned that we're looking for some feedback. If since we can't have it Monday and Tuesday nights at this time, so if you would like to happen at an earlier time, about 4 hours earlier, Dan. 4 p.m. Eastern, or 1 p.m. Pacific. So however you're looking at this, if you send in a thing, you can send me an email, sbs447@gmail.com, and let us know, then we'll do that. Okay, we're up to paragraph 17 in the second chapter on the laws of charity. And this has been mostly dealing with vows. The vow aspect of charity, that when someone had promised or pledged to give an amount, various things kick in. And here we're turning now a little to the community, because the vows are a public proclamation that you're going to do something. So that was part of the emphasis on keeping the word. So he's going at this. The next chapter will be more of this kind. I'm not even sure why he included this here, but let's see what he says. Should we have before us many paupers or many captives, and there is not sufficient funds in the community chest to sustain, clothe, or redeem them all, then we give precedence, and here it comes, to the priest over the Levite. So the priest is a Kohen, is not acting as a priest. He just happens to be a descendant of that tribe. And we have kept track of it. They've kept track of it. Well, actually, that's a question. As an aside, I'll say that on one hand, when it comes to consuming certain holy foods, etc., we don't trust somebody to say that he's a priest. He has to prove it to us. Otherwise, he shouldn't eat that food, and he shouldn't do certain things. But if he says he's a priest, then it's a question of honoring him in the synagogue by giving him the first, calling him up to the Torah the first time, which is usually done. So that we do. We accept that you're a Kohen, everybody agrees you're a Kohen, and so on. But that's all. He's not officiating over the city in any way. It's just that we remember that there's an idea of giving honor to the Kohen, to the priestly family, and so we continue to do that because it's an instruction that we can abide by. So we give him precedence. There's another way we do this, is we give him first dibs, so to speak, on the charity funds if he needs it, over a Levite, someone who's from the same tribe, but not a Kohen, not a descendant of the first Kohen, the first priest, Aaron. So that's now we go to the Levite over a regular Israelite, a regular Jew, and then to the Israelite over the Halal. Now, Halal is interesting. That's someone descended from a Kohen, from a priest, but through a relationship that was forbidden to him. So it's like a damaged priest, and they have a special class of Halal, so they're considered below a regular Israelite. And then to the Halal over the Shtuki. A Shtuki is, I think I'll have this in the notes, a Shtuki is someone whose birth we're not sure of, and we give precedence to the Shtuki over the Asufi. There's another person we're not sure of a different type, and to the Sufi over the Mamzer. The Mamzer is a bastard, but a bastard is not by English language usage. A mamzer is a child born from a totally illegitimate union that was absolutely forbidden. And so, if you know that the child was born from that, so they have a status of mamzer, it's called, and lower. And the mamzer is above a nasin, and the nasin over a proselyte, but someone who is just was not Jewish to begin. All these guys were Jewish to begin with, or presumed Jewish, and then there's somebody who converted in. So see, their background is we don't know, but now they're full Jew, so so they're entitled, but there is a hierarchy. For the Nasin, why is he higher? Has been raised amongst us in sanctity, so he has the background, and the proselyte, the convert over the freed slave. Well, he didn't have that background, but he's over the freed slave. This is going back to the status of someone who was a slave and got free, and as he becomes free, he becomes a full Jew because this slave who has become free is among those who are cursed because he had been a slave. Okay. Paragraph 18. Under which conditions are the above rules stated? When the two are equal in wisdom. You got that whole thing. Now we're only talking about whether they're on the same level. However, if there was a high priest, he was and this is talking in temple time, so he was serving the whole congregation, etc., who was unlearned, and a mamzer, a guy who was of a illegitimate birth, but he was a learned sage, then the learned sage takes precedence. He has raised himself above his birth circumstances, and that's always the case. That you can always raise yourself above your birth circumstances. We were talking where it was just, what you got brought in with you. And so every man who is greater than his colleague takes precedence over him. The idea is that if somehow you have higher status and learning is giving you a higher status, then you take precedence. However, if one of the captives was his teacher or his father, even when there was one there was greater than either of them in wisdom, his teacher or father who is learned takes precedence to this one, even though he is greater than either of them in wisdom, because you have the extra thing that either if he's your father, you have the extra instruction in the Torah to honor your father, and there's also an extra instruction to honor your teacher, the guy that taught you, even though you have someone beside him who could have taught you much more because he knows much more, but he's not the one that taught you. This guy taught you, so you have to give him the honor. That's the way it works there. Okay, so the notes say, these rules of priority for redeeming captives may be more relevant than they first appear. Quite conceivably, the same rules might apply to other situations requiring the allocation of scarce financial resources, such as the supply of medical services to those in need. Since the rules encompass family members for whom there is often a financially crippling burden of nursing care, they may be even more relevant than in the past. Today, if someone in the family gets sick and you have to look after them, it's like you've got to use everything you have. Now, what if you got somebody else sick? These rules will kick in, and it would be pretty dicey. It's they guide you if you're really stuck. If you're closer, there's certain closenesses. This was discussing it on a communal level, so there was no family except for the father situation. You see, the father is closer, so because of that, he takes precedence. Okay, note B. In recounting the conditions that we are not able to overcome, Rambam mentions farnes, which means to sustain, but not lahachil, which means to feed. Perhaps on the assumption that in a case where there isn't enough to feed the poor, then we must all be impoverished. And the situation completely different, because if they have not enough to feed them, then everybody's in danger of their life. So now you have to give up a lot more. Before he was talking about just sustaining them, keeping them on their regular tier. So that's always a consideration. I don't have the resources to go into all the, everything you could. The rabbis, one of the instructions we have that we haven't covered here, but when you're following these guidelines, so there's people that study them and much more than this, and they have answers. If you have a question, well, I understand there's an issue. What do you do when you have this and that conflicting? So you go to the rabbi, to the expert, and he resolves it. Okay, note C, 2 reasons for differentiation are given. Where he has raised amongst us in sanctity, and he is among those who are cursed. That in other words, at the lower end of the scale, there was one guy that he grew up among them, and another guy who was cursed. These reasons, together with the favoritism shown first to the priest and then to the Levite, would seem to establish the hierarchy in the paragraph as based on family status. Compare this with the rules of differentiation stated in the next paragraph, which are more dominant. The hierarchy presented in paragraph 18 is clearly based on the status of wisdom. However, it too is subject to a third theme, that of a personal relationship, such as teacher or father. So this would be in keeping with the rules stated in paragraph 13 of chapter 7, going way back to when we started, that the impoverished of the same city take precedence over those from another city, poor family matters take precedence over non-family matters, and so on. So there's, look, that's life. When you have to make decisions and they're in conflict, so we have rules that will guide us. And you're dealing with, scarce resources, so you have guidance. It's not pleasant to have to put them into practice, but at least you have the guidance. Okay, nevertheless, the rule in this instance remains unclear. If we are following the rule stated in chapter 13 about your own city, your own family, etc., why then is only a teacher and a father mentioned here? What about other family members? Also, why does each have to also qualify as a learned sage, albeit not the greatest sage among those in need, to qualify for this precedence? Because the way he set it up, he said, if your father's there and he's learned, so then even though there's somebody greater, more learned than him, but your father would take precedence. So to answer the latter question, we might conjecture that because learning prowess is harder to determine, we are safer in following the rule of personal relationship, so long as some level of scholarship is evident. Who knows more? But I know he knows something, and I know he's my father, so that's enough for me, that kind of thing. It is also interesting to note that the lowest rank to achieve elevation due to scholarship is the bastard, the mamzer, but not apparently the three ranks lower still, namely the natin, or the nasin, the proselyte, and the freed slave. This may be the result of the dictum, ze bo mitipo kshiro v'ze bo mitipo sula. This one comes from a seed that is fit, while the other comes from a seed that is tainted. In other words, their original birth had a blemish in it, and so that's much harder to overcome with education. I'm not sure that would be correct, but that's all I could say at the time. Note number D is left unanswered by these rules is the priority status of a father who is not learned. Because he said, if your father has some learning, and your father say he goes first. What if he has no learning? Does he come before a priest? Because he's your father. Similarly, what is the priority rule for a teacher who is not a sage? He teaches, but he's not that bright. For all those who have never themselves become a sage, this might be quite common. And it's unanswered. I can't. I'm just pointing out that there's some gaps in the guidelines. Okay, now we go to the source for this is Horiath, which is a tractate in the Talmud that deals with how courts make decisions. And over there's what's called the Mishnah, was the earlier, the precursor to the whole Talmud, said a priest takes precedence over a Levite over an Israelite over a Babs, a Mamzer over a Natin, a Nathan over a proselyte. This is misspelling. The spellings are different because I copied them from different translations. And a proselyte, a convert over an emancipated slave. This order of precedence applies only when all these were in other respects equal. If the bastard, the mamzer, however, was a scholar, and the high priest was an ignoramus, unlearned, even though he was a high priest, I don't know how he became a high priest if he's so uneducated, the learned bastard takes precedence over the ignorant high priest. Well, that's the source for Rambam's statement, and we always go with that the learned guy always takes more precedence. So that was the Talmud, and here's how it developed after Rambam. Shulchan Aruch wrote, should there be presented many paupers, and there are not sufficient funds to sustain, clothe, or redeem them all, then priority is given to the priest over the Levite, over the Israelite, over the Halal. That was Halal again is someone who would have been a Kohen, but is the father and mother shouldn't have been having children altogether. To the halal, they shouldn't have been married, that is. To the halal over the shtuki, which is, I haven't explained this, okay. Shtuki and a Sufi are two guys that we're not sure who their parents are. For one reason or another, they were found on the street, or let's say the mother, a guy died. Yeah, you were talking about. Let's say here's an example: the father, a husband died, and the mother, the woman, instead of waiting a proper time, got together with another guy, whether she was married or not, but we know that they were together, and now she gives birth. So then the birth happens, let's say 9 months after the first guy died, but it could be the second guy's son or child, because it could be born after 7 months. We have a rule that a perfectly normal birth could happen after 9 months or 7 months. So we always have that question: if it's not 9 months, if there was somebody involved with her, in the first few months, then whose child is it? So that's a shtuki. We're not sure um, who the father is, uh, and the Sufi is someone I think who's found on the street. A Sufi becomes the word gathered in. Is somebody abandoned the kid? Yeah, well, we don't know who the parents are. They were abandoned. People used to leave kids on they couldn't look after them. They'd leave them on the street, and people picked them up and took care of them. So this is where, and the Shulchan Aruch is just quoting. It's the same hierarchy that the Rambam gave us. Um, I'm just pausing now to explain it a little better. And the mums over to the sin over the proselyte, that's the convert, and the proselyte, the convert, over the free slave. Same as the Rambam said. Okay, now he continues. Under which conditions are the above rules stated? When the two are equal in wisdom. However, if there was a mamzer who was a learned sage, uh, mamzer was an illegitimate union, but he was learned, and a high priest who was unlearned, uh, he probably was learned, but let's say he wasn't, even though he's a high priest, that doesn't help him. The learned mamzer takes precedence. And even if the sage required but clothes, and the ignoramus required sustenance, and the wife of a sage, the ignorance required sustenance, so then you still give it to the sage. You use the money for the sage. We're talking about the guy that's unlearned, not that he's going to die of hunger, but he could use some more food, something like that. He used to stand in line behind the learned guy. And the wife of a sage is as a sage. So she's not a sage. We're not saying she's not learned, but she's the wife. So she has equal status. And so every man who is greater in learning takes precedence over his fellow. However, if one of them was his teacher or his father, even though there is be one greater than either of them in wisdom, his teacher or father who is learned takes precedence to the one greater than they, because he also has the status of the relationship. And further, the Shulchan Aruch says, if his father, and his teacher are in captivity, he is prior to his teacher, and his teacher is prior to his father, while his mother is prior to all of them. Okay, so let's examine this priority. If you're together with them, you're first. If you have funds, the funds go first to you. You have to look after yourself first. We don't say women and children, well, in this case, we do actually, the mother, but not children necessarily. So you first have to look after yourself, and nothing to be ashamed of there. That's your duty. Next would be your teacher, because he taught you. And if your father didn't teach you, your father probably that's very rare because your father taught you. But let's say your father didn't teach you anything, so then your teacher would take precedence. Your father's there, but if your mother's amongst them, she's prior to everybody, including you, because she's more in danger of being violated, and so that's her outcome is worse, the danger is worse, so she's more needy. Okay, so that is the end of chapter 8, the second of the 4 chapters on the laws of charity, and we have 10 minutes to go. So now I'm going to take you to the next one. I'll write this out and take you here. And we start paragraph 1. This is chapter 9. And I'm going to make it a little bigger. Oh, okay. Okay, paragraph 1. So it is incumbent upon every city that has a Jewish community to appoint as officers of the community chest men of stature and good faith who will make the rounds among the people each Sabbath eve, that's every Friday, with the purpose of collecting from each the proper amount as established for him. These same men are charged with dividing the funds each Sabbath eve and distributing to each pauper food sufficient for 7 days. This is called Koopa Community Chest. So, um, so you see, he's starting with the mitzvah instruction. He quoted the verses, and he was telling you that the Torah instruction is that every person has this instruction from God, this mitzvah, to give charity. Now that everybody has this mitzvah, how are we going to go about doing it? So this is the suggested, and not only the suggested, but this is the traditional way it's done, is that everybody has to get together in a community, a city, and appoint officers. And they should be of a certain type, stature and good faith, not just anybody, not people with bad reputations. And they're going to make the rounds and collect and give out. And that's called a Koopa. Now, similarly, we must establish officers to take every day from every courtyard. And notice the difference here. Over here, will make the rounds among the people. This is from every courtyard. The courtyard was like that's where everybody went out and they sort of cooked together. It was like when you go camping, so you make a big bonfire and everybody's camping, cooking on the same fire. So bread and other baked goods or fruits or money, so whatever's around, from whoever is pledged that day. So you've got this little neighborhood thing that's going, and there's leftovers, I guess. That's how I understand it. And they have even leftover money, and they're willing to give it. They, in turn, must distribute the collections among the poor towards the evening, giving to each of the needy his sustenance for the day. This is called tamchu, soup kitchen. So it's got a different name. So this is every day. It's going around to groups, and it's given out at night for the poor. Okay. Paragraph 3. At no time have we seen or heard of a Jewish community that did not maintain a community chest, a kupa. As to a soup kitchen, the tamchui, though there are some places that have this tradition, while others do not. The widespread custom today is to have the officers of the community chest make their rounds every day and to distribute the proceeds every Sabbath eve and not have the soup kitchen. Now, what do we do today? Today, you see, we have this general society has learned and done this, I think, because they have gotten together and they have welfare funds, and they have people in charge of the welfare funds and a system and a means of distributing and collecting and distributing and so on. So, okay, so we don't do it the same way. We're more sophisticated. We have more people to go to and more sophisticated methods of collection, but that's what it is. So that's doing a mitzvah. They're taking care of people's, basic needs. I think it's marvelous. We even have soup kitchens, but they're generally run by charitable organizations like churches or something like that would maybe especially for the down and out, they would have that. Some synagogues do that. New York, particularly, there was a lot of different kinds. I saw that. I don't know. I knew one in Toronto, but what I wanted to say is that the schools, like they give out hot lunches. Same idea, every day to the kids because they want to make sure the kids have a hot lunch. They're making sure of that. And so it's also a mitzvah. And in my first book, Jewish Teachings for Christians and Other Good People, emphasized the notion that when you find out that you're participating in a mitzvah, you should be aware of it and perform it with that in mind, because that puts you in closer connection with the Torah, with God, with what's right, with the values that you're seeking. So what I'm saying is that when you pay your taxes, you're doing a mitzvah, because those taxes go towards these good things. Now, most of the taxes go for other things, but part of it goes for the welfare, and that's a good thing. Okay. Notes say the implication in paragraph 1 is that these officers of the community chest are the ones who establish the proper amount for each member of the community to tithe. Because he didn't say it out loud, but he said they go around and they're collecting the amount. So there was an assessment on the people they're collecting from, and they're just doing it once a week. You have to come and pay this amount. Today we have tax laws and so on. The soup kitchen, note B, the soup kitchen seems to consist of the ad hoc donations pledged by the members of the community, which are presumably in addition to their obligations to the community chest. There was just the setup. You can't say I gave at the office. Like the guy comes Friday at the normal collection. He says, "No, I gave you a Wednesday night. Don't you remember?" Says, no. You gave. That was up to you. Well, we were expecting every Friday. This is the amount that we set for you. We're expecting it. You want to give Wednesday night? That's great. Its existence assuredly rests on the absolute normalcy and regularity of such ad hoc donations. In other words, if you're going to go around and nobody's going to give you, it's not going to happen. So that's why many places didn't happen. But there's some places that this is the way they wanted to conduct themselves. So you could go around and be sure that you'll collect on rent, not from everybody, but you'll get stuff to give out. Number C. It is curious that the Koopa funds, which appear to be monetary collections, are earmarked for the week's food, while the Tamchui collections, the daily collections, which appear to be most often foodstuffs, are identified with daily sustenance, which could include other needs beyond food. So when you read the words carefully in Rambam, you'll see that the weekly was seemed to be how much the people need for food, and the dailies were whatever we got. Perhaps the intention is that the obligatory donation of Koopa be sufficient for the most basic of needs, at the least. However, its actual disposition is determined by the recipient and could be applied towards other needs when reliance can be placed on further receipts on a daily basis. So we established, look, a guy needs, $200 a week to, just get by. So we're going to give him $200 a week, and he can decide, this week I'm not going to spend all $200 on my rent and my food. I'll eat a little less maybe, and I'll buy a new coat. I need a new coat, or or put away a little money towards the coat, and by the end of the month I'll be able to buy a coat, something like that. Question remains, though, how the amount necessary for daily sustenance is measured. Category being open to much wider interpretation of the value of 7 days provisions of food. So I didn't have an answer. I'm just pointing out. It's curious how would they? That's a problem. How do you assess? But somebody has to assess. You're going around collecting and saying we need this much. You know how many poor people you got. So now you got to figure out. They have the same problem with what's going on in the budget deficit, and everything else. It's exactly the same problem. Okay. It's 9:59. I'm going to stop at D. Put my little ZD there, and we'll call it a night.
Wow. A very interesting discussion tonight for sure, Rabbi. I mean, I find it just amazing. When did they I missed one thing that I wanted to go back and when did they institute that priority, or what was the case? What was the scenario? If there's not enough to go around, then they would put that in place in that order. Was
this submission, it goes back to the earliest times. So, they set up communities, and now they find they have these things, and they came around to the rabbis, and they said, okay, here's the priorities. So if you have it, you're not going to have somebody in every category, but here's the hierarchy. And most places wouldn't have anywhere near that amount of people. Like the differences. But since you asked for priorities, so here's how we're going to set them up. If whatever happens, you'll know how to go forward.
Okay, so if they couldn't meet the need on total, then they would do their best to meet the need in a sequential order
Right. Yes.
that was rational. Okay.
Yeah, if you have to ration out, you have to,
Right.
right? But it's interesting, but you see, you're raising a good point but there's still a thing about those close to you. So, okay, we said earlier, like in the chapter 7, we said your city's first. But what about your neighborhood? If your neighbor, like the guy, you're gonna give to a pot and he's going to starve. You can't, so it's a problem. So okay, so there's guidelines, and now, like I say, when it actually comes up, these are the guidelines that the rabbis study. But probably, if you ever have a problem, you're best off going to say, look, here's my situation. I need your advice, and he'll guide.
And no doubt over periods like the Depression, I mean, there were trying times where people had to start rationing for sure.
Absolutely. Well, we're doing it today. It's my point is like they're rationing, like the government. They're kill all these taxes, and then they have to ration out. They have to have a budget. So we need this, we need that, we need the other thing. There's never enough money.
You were inferring about the U.S. debt ceiling.
Canada's got the same problem. Every city, I think there's a big budget problem in Toronto.
Yeah. Nobody's got a blank check to hand out.
Yeah, and we'd like this, we'd like that. We want a park, we want, but there's people living homeless on the streets. Who's looking at? Look what's happening in New York. They're putting them up in hotels and now in universities and converting old prisons. That's a problem. So you've got to. It's not unusual to have these problems. So you've got to apply the guidelines to make it, consistent with society's values. I guess is what you.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, Ronald, have you got any questions for the rabbi before we close out for the day?
Well, I was just going to say I was really surprised at the length of the chain from the first entitled to the last. But as the rabbi just stated a minute ago, that you're not going to have somebody in every category in your community. But if you did happen to fall that way, you've got the chain of command of how it works. But I was just surprised at the length of the chain. How many categories there were of recipients. That sort of blew me away. But it's totally well organized then, because you're covering every base.
I can assure you, as a young student, the first time I saw that, I was also very surprised. All these people, but this is what happens.
Well, it makes good and clear sense, and I look forward to hearing more about it. So we are off again till Sunday, right? We're back Sunday night at this time, 9:30 Pacific, 6:30 or 6:30 Pacific, 9:30 Eastern. For more with Shlomo Schwartz. So we're going to sign up for today, and we'll see you Sunday night at 9:30 Eastern, 6:30 Pacific. Until then, Shabbat Shalom to everybody, and we'll see you then. Bye for now.
Bye-bye. Good night.
Right.